The return to sacred fire on the way into discussing Kabbalah wasn't accidental. The history of the science is just like the history of the Israelites. It's multifaceted and incredibly rich. The idea of this solidified monotheism is unfortunately a construct created by Christian literalists and Zionists. You know, people whose agenda needs the Torah to be word for word exactly what it says, and not an abstract treatise written by countless mystics with vastly different concepts on how one should practice halakha, or the law. I mean, Israel was first united in like 1100 to 930 BCE. Even then, they were just flirting with monotheism. That's why El, or El Chai, or the storm god Yahweh, Baal, or any other myriad of gods pops up throughout the Tanakh. Prophets advised kings to disregard those gods, but they did recognize them as gods. Then we see the first temple go up. The nation is divided behind political turmoil running us through till about 586 BCE. The northern kingdom is dispersed in like 722. Monotheism begins to become a thing, and the prophets go full-on political activism and get buck wild in this period. The first exile is 586 to 539, and that's where we see monotheism solidified as cats like Isaiah help the people to survive in exile. Sprinkle in Aramaic being the state language, fully equipped with the influx of Near Eastern traditions that later Greek schools will really dig on, and a new idea emerges. Think of Astarte, Inanna, and Sophia, and how they all share that feminine energy our modern minds consider to be so vital. Because here in Malkut it is, right? The Second Temple period runs from 539 onwards into the modern era, as the Israelites return from exile. The Samaritan woman at the well ties into the descendants that were never in exile, and there's a whole other layer we can add to this later, but for now, let's focus on the Israelites. They return and they start living in their homeland for the first time in a long time. Torah becomes this communal concept, and the purely temple-based system begins to fade. The prophetic era closes, and it becomes a conspiracy theory to track down where they really went, or if Elijah really did create a school for mystics atop Mount Carmel, or any of those other claims that you hear about in occult circles. They're all speculative. We don't actually know. Sometime in the late Second Temple era, more fracturing begins, and we see the development of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Fringe groups in Qumran, like the Essenes, Nazarenes, and Nazarites, are at least recorded by the Romans when they entered the landscape to occupy the region. What would become Christianity was, at that time, just another cluster of teachers who would gather in the temple commons to discuss Jewish life. Now, rebel sects vehemently against Roman occupation erupted, and the temple was burned down again in 70 AD as they revolted. Rabbinical Judaism, as we consider it today, begins to develop as Christians begin to splinter into a separate practice with dozens of competing ideas, hence the birth of the New Testament and the end of the Hebrew canon. Aside from a few parts of the Apocrypha, almost no mystical literature of the prophetic period survived. But anytime we're talking about Jewish mysticism, please believe we're talking about connecting to Hashem in the same way the prophets had. Some of the mystical teachings of the prophets did carry on, though, but it's the stuff of secret societies shared to the narrowest of circles. The science has always been closely guarded by the elect few who kept the sacred fires lit in the hearts of people, even if they didn't write it down. So were the prophets the earliest Kabbalists? Probably, but we barely see any mention of it until the Talmud is written. We see the term workings of the Merkhabah used, but it doesn't really fill us in. Because like the famous first century rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai tells us, the workings of the Merkhabah should not be taught even individually, except the one who is wise, understanding with his knowledge. Even the term Merkabah is a bit vague. From a purely Jewish point of view, the word comes from the root rakav, meaning to ride, as in a riding vehicle. But some Hermeticists somewhere just heard that and hollered, no! The claim that it's three distinct Egyptian words, Mer, Ka, and Ba, holds some weight. And it's fascinating because their meaning is light, body, and soul. Besides, when you combine these three words together in the Egyptian tongue, it still means chariot. So it doesn't take away from the original meaning of the term. We're still talking about a divine vehicle one uses to ascend to the throne room of Hashem, no matter what language we're talking about it in. Factor in the symbolism and rich history of sacred geometry between Kemet, the Israelites, and Babylonians, or anyone with a rich understanding back then, and we see just how important ascent was in the ancient world. All three cultures believed the highest degree of consciousness one could attain would lead one beyond the physical plane into the higher worlds. Think of the Ari, describing those involved in the workings of the Merkhabah as being engaged in hit badadu, an early form of Jewish meditation. The Hekalat traditions are based on making a chamber of light to ascend to the supernal chambers, like the supernal triad, right? If we could trace a tribe's painful journey through a few of their neighboring city states where they pick up all this really in depth mystical knowledge in their journey to reach a state of divine union, then who on earth today can claim to have any rights to transcendence in general? Mysticism itself is a mongrelization of our most sacred aim, to return to the source of the Yah in divine union. No shade. It's just food for thought. Until next time, keep riding in chariots of light and living in love.